Well, welcome to our second technical webinar. Today, we will walk through a case scenario that has an open contact and needing some minor adjustments, which happens regularly in our everyday production. So we're going to start off with advanced color application, glazed with spray glaze. Then we'll start getting into structure application very slowly, using as correction firing, such as adding contacts, adding volume, incisal of corners to achieve the final form that we are looking for. So then I will introduce firing parameter for structure. Then we will end it with a discussion with your questions, okay? So let's get started. Here's our color charts in the whole MiYO system. Today, the video will include 10 color applications on a crown. As you're going to see, the crown will be needing some minor adjustments. Okay, so we'll play the video real quick. So here's the crown, zirconia, multi-layer. The surface was treated and ready to go. So as you can see, the contact is slightly open. The incisal edge is shorter than what I would like. And I would like to improve on the form itself. But before I do that, we have to do all the staining and the color applications here. So here is translucent A. I'm going to apply on the facial, the labial part of the gingiva. And then I would use translucent clementine near the interproximal region, so it is slightly intensified there. So already, like you've seen on the videos, previous videos, the contrast is already working for us. So from here, I cannot emphasize more about the application method, the brush, the way the color is touching the zirconia, not the brush tip. So as you could see, I'm applying translucent clementine on the interproximal region, and now here is lumen. I'm going to bump up the value a little bit and create a subtle contrast within all the colors. But like I've mentioned before, I always start with the gingiva, and then I work my way up to the incisal 1/3. So you could, I usually put a puddle of color, and then I start to spread them. And make sure the thickness is pretty even, and I don't see blotchiness or I don't see spots. I work the color so that it's even thickness everywhere. Okay. So when you're using MiYO or any kind of color application, whether it's on monolithic or you're even layering ceramic, it's really all about contrast. You have to use contrast as a system and as a guide to emphasize a lot of the colors by applying different saturations and different opacities next to each other that will emphasize the whole thing. Okay, I'm putting here translucent smoke. And of course, near the contact areas, I'm going to intensify a little bit, but as we go towards the middle part of the facial, then I will go slightly more subtle. So I'm spreading the color, and I'm not putting smoke all the way down to the incisal 1/3, but I'm wrapping it to the mesial and the distal corners, okay? So we'll touch up the contrast part at the end of the whole thing, but I always have the contrast in my mind. And I'm intensifying some spots so it does look, I want that 3D appearance and the depth that I'm looking for. So here I'm applying translucent storm to intensify the transparency on the medial and the distal corners. And as you can see, I'm constantly dabbing and moving the color around instead of using brush strokes. Okay. So I'm intensifying, dabbing, and making sure the color doesn't puddle or doesn't appear spotty. So, and you could always use a little bit of glaze liquid to kind of manipulate position of the colors. If you're having trouble making the color evenly spread out, then I would usually use a little bit of the glaze liquid to move it around freely. Okay, so the color of the crown is starting to come together, as you can see, and I'm going to emphasize a lot more color and contrast in different zones. I'm going to also create some mamelon effects and some different kind of opacities to make it look like it's a layered ceramic restoration. So here is mamelon coral. As you can see, I'm putting a good sum of it. It's on the intense side, and from here I'm going to start to spread and lighten the color and to create that subtle contrast. Okay, so the medial is more of a strong mamelons, and the distal is a little bit less intense, and the middle part is scattered, going towards the same direction of the tooth, how the tooth grows. So I put a little bit of smoke in between the two mamelons on the medial and the distal side, and then I'm putting the mamelon structure in the middle. So as you can see, I apply a little bit, and then I scatter, and I position correctly so the mamelon structure goes how the tooth grows, the direction of the tooth growth. Okay, so I use a little bit of linen and a little bit of mamelon wheat to break and use the contrast even more. And I'm going to start to move things around a little bit to the way I like it. And then here is stained snow, which is a very pure opaque white. And as you can see, I float a good sum of color on top, and then I reposition the structures of that white stain. Okay. So I correct the direction of it, and then the intensity. Some areas I blend it so it's a subtle blend and a subtle transition, as you can see. And then I used the same stained snow to emphasize that contrast a little bit. And then sometimes I would put crack lines, and you'll see me put some crack lines between the mamelons here. So you could really see the benefits of MiYO. You could really put colors on top of colors without mixing them. And you're going to see here, I'm going to slowly blend the end of the white and then move the crack line a little bit around so I have the correct position. And as you can see, I'm doing the same thing on the medial side. I'm blending the end of the crack and repositioning the way I want. Okay? So the colors float on top of each other. It's very, very unique. And here I'm applying translucent straw to create that extra contrast of that translucent area on the body and the incisal 1/3 region. Okay. I'm going to re-emphasize some of the contrast using translucent storm. So you don't have to put color to the whole surface. I like to put it in spots, intensifying in spots and making areas a little bit more subtle. So here I'm applying the halo spring, and you could see all the colors coming really together. And as you can see, I'm wrapping the halo around that incisal embrasure a little bit there. And now all the colors works really, really nice in contrast, and we're very close to now appearance of a layer ceramic, right? And I'm going to put some subtle white spots. Okay. Then once I'm done with all the colors, I use a spray glaze to go over and cover the rest of the real estate of this, the labia of the crown, just to make sure. So like I mentioned before, the direct spray does not hit the surface of the crown. The direct spray is on the side, and I drag it around twice or 3 times until I get that eggshell appearance of on the crown itself. Then I will fire. Okay. And then we'll get into after it's fired, we'll slowly get into the structure application, and we will today use structure as a correction firing. So we'll add some contacts, and we'll add some areas that I think needs to be fixed. And this is how it looks after it's fired. So I got a nice glaze on the surface. I put a glaze liquid before I apply the structure material, just because of the way the structure adapts to the zirconia a little bit better if it's moist. And as you can see, it's very nicely adapted with the liquid surface. And I'm going to add the some volume of the crown. I'm going to add the contact, of course, at the end. And I'm going to add the incisal edge to mimic the adjacent central. Okay. So here I'm adding structure window. So I'm adding structure window because I achieved all the color and all the value that exactly the way I want. And I don't want it to shift in color or value. I just want to add a little bit of volume and at the same time add the translucency. So I'm going to stick with structure window here. And there's a lot of freedom to structure as well. You could, if you want a certain color, if you like a certain color in the MiYO system, you could always mix that color into the structure and then apply it the way, however you want. Here, I'm going to add the incisal edge, but of course, I don't want a transparent structure on the incisal edge because there's a halo there. And I want a semi-translucent, but almost a little bit more dense appearance, just like the halo spring colors. So what I've done here, I used the whitest structure, which is structure ghost, 1 part of structure ghost, 1 part of stained linen, and 1 part of stained halo spring. So my goal is to go slightly brighter than the halo spring color in the MiYO system. At the same time, use the structure to also add that length that I'm looking for, and also have that semi-translucency that I would love to add in this restoration. So carefully add the volume that you want, and make sure the form is exactly what you're looking for. So there's a lot of freedom with structure. Like I said, you could always mix colors You could mix glaze paste if you want to have a little bit easier control to float. If you want to use it as a correction, or you could use straight structure, really up to you. There's a lot of freedom there. So I want to emphasize here a little bit on the line angle, and I want that correct reflection on the line angle. So at the same time, add the translucency. Here I'm adding structure window. Make sure the structure is adapted to the surface well. Either you brush it very slightly, like almost like a paracamata texture across, so it blends the structure into the surface of the zirconia. Otherwise, it might pull on you or it might lift on you, so make sure it's adapted well to the surface. Okay, so for the gingiva area, I thought I needed some volume. All the areas that I'm adding the structure, I think I need to add some volume there. So after all the adjustments, all the adding of the structure, I added the contact before I fired it, and we'll see the next video that shows a finished restoration. Okay. So after everything was fired and I adjusted the contact, and as you could see, it's exactly what I want now. And you could see the translucency that I've achieved on the halo, and at the same time the density on the halo, of the color of the halo. Okay. Fired outcome. So I had a lot of questions and requests on readdressing the surface treatment. So whether there's not enough study to show about, to talk about, you know, aluminum oxide, sandblasting, or glass feeding, or how it really affects the zirconia surface. But the way I like to control the surface tension, I like to ultrasonic. I clean the zirconia part myself with a toothbrush using dishwashing soap or any kind of soap available. And then I drop it into the ultrasonic for about 5 minutes. Then you'll see a video here that's after the ultrasonic. So even with a very clean surface, the surface tension is still there, and you will see it in this video. So you could see the surface tension still there. The zirconia part is absolutely very clean at this point. So at this point, what I like to do is I put a glaze paste, a very thin layer of glaze paste over the zirconia, and then I simply just rub it off. So you can see I'm applying very thin, just slap it on there, and then rub the glaze paste off so it's a clean, matte surface. Okay, and then the glaze liquid. As you can see, the surface tension is completely eliminated. And every zirconia part, I go through the same procedure. Okay. Okay, so the firing parameters. It's definitely a little bit different than the regular in-sink glaze or glaze spray. It's the dry time is very, very important. If you're using structure material, you want to be on the safe side with the dry time. So total dry time is 10 minutes here. The preheat is not 450, it's 550. The high temperature, 720. Heat rate is 55. It's 10 degrees higher than the regular glaze. 1 minute hold, of course, vacuum 100%. And then, so then you guys have the firing parameters for structure, and I was able to show you guys how to use structure as an introduction for a correction firing. So I would love to see you guys play with the structure a little bit, give us some feedback. The feel of the structure is very different if you guys haven't played with it yet. So I hope this webinar helps you guys put a foot into the whole structure application part. And the next webinar, I will cover structure in much more detail. We will cover 2 different ways to use structure. One is very similar to a conventional layering ceramic. We will apply a certain amount of thickness, and then we will grind the way we want. We will texture the way we want, and then we will fire that. And then the second step is the ultimate. We will cover a technique where we add all the details, fine details, pericomata, the lobes, the corners, and all the final form, all during the wet stage, and then fire that and polish. So yes, we are practically done with today's webinar. If you guys have any questions, I'm open to take them now.
Great.
Okay.
All right. So those of you who may have joined us a little bit late, everybody's on mute. So if you have any questions, you have 2 ways of doing that. You can raise your hand using the little hand icon, and I'll unmute your line. You can talk to James directly, or you can chat with me. I'm Jensen, presenter in the panel, if you don't feel comfortable speaking, and I can ask any questions on your behalf. James, I did have some questions rolling in as you were speaking, so I'll start with those, and then we'll see if anybody has any live questions as well. Sure. So, why didn't you put a layer of glaze paste down on the first restoration as instructed previously?
This one I wanted to kind of show a way to glaze without, with using the spray glaze instead, because we covered the glaze paste method last time. This time I wanted to cover a spray glaze, but you could do the same here. You could apply the glaze paste and then do all the colors. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted to show you guys another way.
Okay. You apply the spray glaze on top of the wet MiYO colors, correct?
Yep.
Okay. What was the thickness of the heavily characterized MiYO crown that you showed in the first video?
See, like even with all those colors, it really is not more than 0.1, 0.2 at the most. At the most is 0.2. But I usually get a thickness about 0.2 with structure added. So you could imagine it's around 0.1. And just to make sure, the video that you guys see in the webinars is very highly magnified. So the little brush that I was using is a really 000 stain brush. It looks like almost like a number 4 brush in the video. So it's very amplified. So yeah.
Okay. What is the best way to get a gray translucent look that some of the 3D shades require? We've tried using smoke, but it didn't seem like it was enough.
When you say it wasn't enough, does that mean the intensity of the translucent colors? It's not intense enough? Is that what you mean?
I'm not sure. We'll wait for an answer.
Okay.
It's not gray enough.
If it's not gray enough, I usually go with Storm, but Storm can be too blue. So I would try mixing storm and smoke together. That could be a happy middle.
Would a thicker application of smoke help as well?
Thicker application will also help. But that thicker application, don't be afraid of the thickness of application. It's yeah, it's very, very minor.
Okay. We've had, there are two questions, James, that are very similar. One is asking what is the correct way to get structure material prepared on the tray prior to application. That's tied in with another question that's saying, my structure is so thick I can't stir it. Can I thin it? So I'm wondering if maybe you want to address what you're doing with the structure material.
Very important question. I would not thin the material. If you want to thin the material, then it is flexible in a sense where there are times that I've mixed glaze paste with the structure, but you start to lose control of the control of creating texture, the fine texture, and then now if you use glaze paste, you have to consider the glaze medium that's in the glaze paste. So there will be a little bit more shrinkage if you use glaze paste to dilute that. I try not to dilute it unless it's used on top of a glazed, already glazed crown. So let's say for just concentrating on this webinar, there's a glazed crown that I need to add contacts or I need to add a little bit of volume or something like that, then yes, you could use a glaze paste to dilute that so that you could float it a little bit easier. But really the advantage that you have with the structure, just the way it is, it's really the optimal way to use. But I hope that kind of answers a little bit, but the spreading, I mean, the preparation of structure, I usually stay away from metal spatulas, first of all. You have to stay away from metal spatulas with any kind of ceramic material, because the metal spatula, you will get that metal particles into the material. Very fine, but it will get in there, and it will start to alter value a little bit. You might not notice it with the naked eye, but it absolutely does do that. So I will stay away from metal spatula, first of all. Either using a zirconia spatula or an agate, I would spread the structure very thin on the palette. So making sure that you don't see any bubbles or you don't see unmixed areas like the frosty white spots, you want to eliminate that and make that very, very flat. And if you're having a hard time picking it up, try, there's times when I use a spatula, a zirconia spatula to pick it up, but I adapt to the crown with the brush, okay? So I hope that answered and that helped. Maybe I could readdress this on the next webinar for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you're planning on covering it. So there were those two separate questions. If you have any other questions that you want addressed, feel free to let me know. I just know personally when I sat down to build a crown, you have to mix the colors, the color paste, but these structures are a little bit different. And as James said, you kind of lay it out on your glass slab or your palette, and you kind of flatten it out, if you will, and then use the correct instrument to pick it up. James, as far as when you're mixing MiYO colors with structure, do you recommend using a liquid medium then or no?
No. Yeah, I just use straight MiYO colors with structure.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Yep. What would you do if you wanted to bump up the value of the finished crown a bit higher? So
after the crown is finished and we're now at a place where if we fire one more time, the glaze could be a little bit more overfired, right? So at this point, I would, just to be sure, I mean, you could use lumen right on top of it, but lumen, you don't want to add too much thickness after it's fired, right? So you could even mix a little bit of stained snow into lumen and slightly intensifying that opaque white, right? And without, and then just apply very thin instead of a certain amount of thickness to bump up the value. So I would do that personally. I would mix maybe 10% of stained snow with lumen and then apply it, just like how I did with regular lumen.
I know you briefly addressed this in the last question about properly preparing the structure material on the tray, but I don't know if maybe somebody stepped away, because the question is, can glaze liquid be used to thin the structure material? So if you just maybe want to readdress that, please.
So, I mean, you can. I mean, you could do really whatever you want with MiYO. You can. It will be very interesting for you guys to have an experience with the glaze liquid or glaze liquid on the structure. But you have to really consider any kind of glaze, you know, paste or liquid. It's just the medium, and this is going to burn off. So if you mix into the structure, there might be a more of a shrinkage to whatever you add. So you have to consider that. But there is freedom to do whatever you want here. I've done that as well, and I thought in my experience, I would really just stick with the way it is in the bottle.
Okay. How and where do you use the MiYO powder fissure?
Oh, MiYO powder, the fissure is, we made that in powder form and purposely because when we stain molars, the pits, the fossa, we don't want that pit and the fossa to be glazed, right? We don't want that area to be shiny. We want it slightly matte. So we made a powder stain, which is one powder stain in the kit, just to use as these intense fossa areas. So I usually use it for the pits of the molars and not too much on the anteriors. Hope that answers the question. Is it like disconnected?
No, she's good. She's there.
One more question. I know you briefly touched on it earlier, but I think maybe we've got somebody who's starting to use structure a little bit more, or maybe is using it and struggling, and they've asked for you to explain how do you prepare a new bottle of structure material. So maybe high level, you just want to go over what you do? So
I forgot to mention about structure. One key thing about structure application, I know we don't want to mix glaze, we don't want to mix water with the glaze paste or glaze liquid, right? But with structure, I clean off my brush with the water. So it's much more easier for the structure to be manipulated when you use water as a cleaning tool. So the preparation for structure, I usually open it. There is a little bit of the liquid formed on the surface, on the very height of the structure. I usually mix the whole jar very thoroughly, and then I pick up a little chunk and then put it in my palette, spread them very thin, make sure I flatten them out, make sure I don't see any white spots or bubbles because it doesn't help. And then I usually pick it up with a spatula and then using the water with brush, and I manipulate the structure into the restoration.
Okay. How long does the structure material last on your glass slab?
For days. There was during the time when I was testing a lot of this stuff, I had the structure out in my pallet with just a plastic cover so the dust doesn't get on. I just had it sitting in my bench for, I don't know, almost like 2-3 weeks, and it still felt the same after 2-3 weeks. So, yeah, it lasts a while.
Okay. I think that's it for questions on my end. Kevin, did you have any?
No, I think actually I saw the same ones you did this time, Ames, so I think we're good on this side.
Perfect. Okay. Well, then I guess we're done. So, again, in case you joined early, James is planning on doing another more in-depth presentation on the structure materials within the next several weeks. In the meantime, if you are beginning to play around with structure materials and even just the regular MiYO colors and you're having any questions or any struggles, please reach out to Jensen. Our technical team and our sales staff is well versed in the material, and we're happy to get you the help that you need. It's a little bit different than existing materials, so we understand that there might be a learning curve, especially with the structure materials. We want to make sure you have the tools to be successful. So please use the exclusive launch partner page that we have set up for you guys for some videos and also recordings of these, along with the in-depth instructions for use. Really rely heavily on your sales rep and also the technical team if you need us. And Kevin and James, anything else to add?
I would, Aim, I think you said at the beginning of the webinar, but we love your feedback. So we really encourage you to send us pictures, to send us any kind of details on, the case that you used MiYO on, because we're really collecting that information. You're the first group of people to receive MiYO on a commercial level, and that's exciting, but we really do want your feedback. So please communicate with us. You will not over-communicate, I promise. So I think that's it on my side, Aim. James?
So on the next webinar, I will really get into the structure application, how we treat the structure from opening the new bottle to the 2 techniques, and we'll go from there.
Great.
Great. All right. Thanks to everybody on the line. James, thank you for your time. Kevin, you too. And we'll be in touch soon. Have a great afternoon, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.